Greetings from wherever you are, morning for us here in the West, evening for some of you on the other side of the world. And again, we always really appreciate those of you who get up in the middle of the night to join us. And we know that probably many of you did, because this is about systems mapping on the go and travel. And it is such a pleasure for me to introduce our presenter today. Dr. Natalie Kors is a professor at the University of Florida. She is a student of systems thinking and advanced facilitator cohort graduate, and an amazing human being. And so it is I'm just thrilled. I'm just thrilled to learn from her and to see all of you. And Open Studio is a special time just from the community that it builds. And I know that you are going to have many, many takeaways this morning. So I do not want to take 1 minute of her time. And so I'm going to turn it over to Natalie. Natalie, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Oh, thank you so much, Sherry, and to the Water Center for the opportunity to share with y'all. And thank you all for joining. Super excited to spend this time with you. I've incorporated systems into my curriculum for the past 16 years, but kind of delved into systems mapping about 8 years ago when I transitioned into a faculty role. And as you all probably know, once you start, there's no going back with systems. And it's an ever expanding kind of network of amazing people that you get to connect with and just learn and grow from. And so I'm excited to maybe learn from you as well as we kind of discuss some more about systems. And for today, the on the go kind of context that I'll be speaking from is connected to study abroad programs and how I incorporate systems mapping into some of those kind of curricular pieces. Now, on the go may look a little different for you. That environment might be in the boardroom, it might be in a community center, all sorts of different places that we just get to incorporate systems mapping in. And so we are constantly building that toolbox as leaders and learners for systems to apply wherever we may be. So let's get started. So I love a good theme. So, of course, with On the Go, we have to lean heavy into this travel theme. So, we've got a little bit of a edge-venture today to go on. So, here's kind of our itinerary to go off of. We're going to first kind of talk about what should I pack for a on the go systems mapping adventure. We also have to ask, where's the gelato? Now, that will make a little bit more sense as we kind of travel along together. But I hope you enjoy a little bit of the wordplay with that. And of course, no itinerary is complete without the question of, are we there yet? Maybe you've heard that just a few times over the years of traveling. So first, to get us started, what should I pack? A question for y'all to engage. What is one thing that you don't leave home without for a trip? Now, of course, we're not speaking of your passport or ID, a phone or chargers. What's kind of that random thing that you can't live without for a trip? While you are kind of inputting those, I look forward to reading through some of that piece. I will share mine, which is a travel clothesline, because you never know when you may need to do a quick little bit of laundry. Maybe you were in a really hot environment, didn't quite expect it. And so that's my kind of essential that I don't leave home without. I'm loving these coming in of Post-its, iPad, earplugs. Definitely some earplugs, especially if you have some loud individuals with you. Glasses, ooh, definitely an important one. Ooh, tea bags and honey. I am a tea connoisseur, so I appreciate that one very much. And lots of good pieces of sleep essentials is a common theme I'm seeing come up. So I love these. Keep them rolling in the chat as you kind of join and think more on it. I also have to explain this photo very quickly of when things maybe don't quite go as planned for your packing process. And that is when your t-shirts you ordered didn't come in time to hand them out to your students for the trip. So you get the joy of packing 25 t-shirts into one side of your luggage and adjusting your own packing accordingly so you can get everyone else their info or attire. And I will say one of the perks with that was it left lots of room to bring back some solid bits of food goods back from that particular location. All right, thank you for sharing your bits of packing pieces. Maybe you've taken some notes as well for some things to include in your next packing adventure. Now, we all know to kind of get going, you have to have some good luggage to start a trip with. So, in the sense of this kind of travel theme, our luggage is really what are the foundations of your program. And what I mean by that, especially from kind of my academic context, going into including systems mapping into a particular context, I think it's essential for us to have kind of a guiding framework for what we're doing. If we're putting the tools in, we need to have that framework for the purpose of what we're using it for. So, for a higher education context for me, we have this tripartite mission of research and education and outreach, and that provides that foundation of such a powerful potential to play a really transformative role to address really complex, both local and global challenges. Along the lines of global leadership development, we all know that the systems lens requires us to have multiple perspectives to effectively kind of solve that problem and to even discuss those issues that are really complex. We know from the Future Jobs Report that systems thinking is one of those top skills, which is really exciting that that is recognized on such a platform to emphasize to our students that this is an important skill to develop, to address challenges, and just to do life in general. That transformation that we get through kind of the multiple perspectives and really having that ability to understand interdependence of issues is just something that comes so naturally, but also such a reinforcement of the systems thinking and systems mapping process. Now, for visual thinking tools, I know I love systems mapping. I'm assuming y'all are here and you love systems mapping too. And so embracing those visual thinking tools really helps us to understand and communicate the elements of a system that we're trying to understand wherever we are. And for me, with kind of global challenges and how do we give a good framework to people in terms of understanding massive challenges that we're facing from a global society, I utilize the UN Sustainable Development Goals to frame my students out for those issues. It's not the end all be all framework, but it's a beautiful framework. Literally, the colors that they utilize in that communication. It's just a really nice package, which with a lot of great data to help kind of back up some pieces of information in terms of knowing what kind of context we're walking into. Now, we also have to be really clear in terms of why we're doing what we're doing. And so the contextual understanding of whatever your on the go context is doesn't mean that you're underprepared for that context. While some things may be spontaneous, it doesn't mean you don't have that toolbox that you're walking into a space with, ready to take on whatever the challenge ahead of you is. And so a few kind of other things to consider in terms of what are we packing for this kind of on the go experience. One, what kind of systems language does your audience have? Are they familiar with some of the terms? I think so often, especially in academia, we kind of get the lingo down and we talk in that lingo and in your the systems kind of context when you're with fellow systems folks, we talk in our own language sometimes. And so making sure that your audience knows what kind of systems context that you're speaking from, how familiar are they with that systems language? And if they aren't familiar with it, kind of bring them up to speed in that particular context. Likewise, what kind of mapping experience do they have, if any? It may be a completely new concept for them. And so being sure to step by step kind of walk them through that process is a really important piece from that facilitation side and teaching kind of side of thing to walk into wherever you are for that on the go opportunity to give them that best opportunity for mapping with clarity. Also, in terms of stakeholder awareness, what kind of awareness does your group have with the different players within a context that they're trying to analyze or kind of map in that context? What kind of different perspectives can you help bring to the table to help create better understanding, maybe before you're even in that space? If that's not an opportunity, then what can you provide to kind of get things started with that mapping process to allow multiple perspectives to be held in that space for mapping? And if you don't know, I would think it's safe to say, assume they don't know and kind of start with the basics step by step. And with multiple opportunities with the same group, they pick up that language, they pick up that skill set, and you get to level after level of being able to really map out those complex challenges in a meaningful way as you go. Now, on the more pragmatic side, what actually makes it into my suitcase when I'm leading these kind of study abroad programs to incorporate systems mapping in the process? Quite literally, giant sticky notes. Kind of by happen chance, but I learned that a mini easel pad fits exactly into my 24-inch suitcase. And so that has traveled with me for multiple study abroads now. Of course, the habits cards, those come with me as well, but I always account for about one set for every 3 to 4 students that I'm traveling with. I don't try to take 20 sets of habits cards in my suitcase. While I love them, they take up precious weight that needs to be present for bringing back olive oil and almond butter and all of the good things from a particular country. Also, markers, sticky notes, however much space you have for a variety of colors and sizes, certainly working with that. I also develop a case study booklet for each of my study abroads that really the students appreciate having a physical copy of. I prefer giving that to each of them ahead of time, so they are responsible for bringing that. But if not, that just also goes to the weight allocation that on the way back I don't have to account for and get to fill it with other things. And naturally, with any kind of travel experience and study abroad, you have to pack your flexibility because the best laid plans, something's going to go awry. So, packing that flexibility and just a positive attitude is always essential in that kind of context. So, now that we know what to pack, both literally and kind of figuratively, there's the more important question, and that is, where's the gelato? So go ahead and drop in the chat. What's your favorite flavor of gelato or ice cream? While you're answering, I'll share just a little bit. Gelato just kind of seems to be a unifying element when I'm traveling, in particular with students. Everyone's always open for uh, looking for gelato, going for it, trying some different flavors. And if gelato isn't available in that particular context, just finding some dessert or something sweet together. And some of the best conversations and networking happen over dessert because who's not happy when you're eating some form of sweet dessert or gelato? And bonus points when you get a really great view with that particular gelato. So I'm loving these flavors coming through. My go-to flavors, in particular when I'm in a European context, is the combo of dark chocolate and pistachio. So that is a winning combo for me, pistachio being the key one in the mix. I haven't found anything stateside that challenges a gelato from the pistachio kind. If you have good recommendations, go ahead and put those in the chat too. I will always take those recommendations. But lovely flavors coming through the mix. So, to keep this moving on the adventure, I'll share with you my little bit of a play on words for the sweet spot of kind of what does systems mapping on the go actually look like in context. So, with that little bit of play on words, gelato is where's the greater engagement and learning with active tools on the go. So as we get systems mapping on the go, here's kind of an overview of kind of the tools that I utilize along the process and I'll walk through each one of these over the next little bit of time. First of all, case studies. Case studies are something that I absolutely love utilizing because it brings in that location-specific context. It allows a student to connect to challenges in a particular setting that they may otherwise not have even been aware of as they're traveling along a study abroad. So often in study abroad, we have a great focus on that intercultural connection point, which is a passion of mine. I love intercultural leadership and communication pieces. But beyond that cultural connection, there's so many other connectors to local context to have meaningful discussions with locals, and of course, to apply those systems mapping tools. So we'll talk a bit more about case studies. The mapping tools are, of course, at the heartbeat of really understanding those issues and being able to help students visualize some of those challenges and truly see how many different pieces are at play, how many different stakeholders are engaged in a particular challenge, and also just how limited their own perspective can be in a particular context. When students are traveling around, oftentimes you have that kind of comparative nature of you want to find what's similar in that context, kind of minimizing that difference almost in that particular context to try to find something in common to connect over. There's absolutely nothing wrong with operating in that space, but mapping tools really enable students to dive a little bit deeper and ask deeper level questions to be able to understand from both a personal and also a cultural perspective of different viewpoints on that issue. And sometimes that opens doors for some comparison to maybe a similar issue back home, which is also a great practice. But more importantly, it gives them some insights into that local context. And of course, reflection. I say of course, but reflection is just one of those things that I think study abroad can't do without. It's an essential component for students to really be able to process what they're saying, both as a group collective, as well as on that personal level to make some of those connection points. So let's delve a little bit more into the case studies. So from the case study development perspective, I will say I failed measurably the first time I tried doing case studies in a study abroad context because it was my first time leading a study abroad in that particular country. I did my research in a few of the different areas we were going to be traveling to, but I pulled very general articles around some of the larger sustainable development goal efforts in that particular context. It was a good overview, but when we got to that location and tried to start mapping out that challenge, the students were struggling, and quite honestly, I was also struggling because we didn't have that personal insight. We didn't have the personal connections to stakeholders in that context. And so we had such a 10,000-foot view of the challenge that it was really difficult to pick out kind of the more nuanced details to truly map out the connections. So I learned from that experience for sure that to really do the case studies justice in the study abroad and context, it was connecting with some of the local stops that we were making, letting those particular stops know that, hey, we're going to be including some context around your area and around kind of your production space that will help students come into this visit with maybe a deeper level of understanding of your operation than what maybe other tour groups may come into your context. So here's a heads up about the questions that you may be getting that would be more specific to a systems kind of understanding. And that development process also enabled some feedback from some of the organizations. Now, not every organization we were visiting was super engaged in that process, but they were okay with that process. And so in the context of kind of developing, you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, it's a couple of images, especially the top and bottom image of just a one-page kind of blurb that I include in the case booklets. Some of it's a little bit of context. The QR codes are linked to direct articles, whether popular press in that local area. Some of them are academic research articles that speak to that particular challenge. Try to do 2 to 4 articles for each of the contexts that we're going to be in. Primarily because of time. A lot of times students aren't getting these until 2 to 3 weeks prior to travel. They're getting ready to travel, sometimes internationally for the very first times. There's a lot of things they're trying to do in that prep work, but having them look at these kind of case support documents ahead of time, as well as the students also have an assignment connected to one of the cases involved in the trip. So we kind of break them out into groups. So they also have to go and find an article that helps kind of understand that particular context. And then those students assigned to the specific case context are also the ones responsible for asking the, I would say, deeper level questions in that particular location. So it helps the group get a deeper understanding of the context which we're in. So a few examples of what these cases look like for my study abroad programs. We visit a honey producer in Greece. Fantastic, very hands-on, engaged learning stop. Literally, the students are in the bee suits and holding bees on their finger. Like they love, love, love this honey producer. But they also, the honey producer, they're fantastic educators around bee production and the role of bees in society and in agriculture. So they give the background story on their particular operation. They talk about unintended consequences. And so it's a natural fit for helping to map that process of different actions that we as human beings may kind of feel are beneficial to the environment, but may actually be causing some unintended consequences for bee populations, and what that kind of spirals into in terms of impacts on agricultural crops, honey production overall, and really that role of pollinators in kind of our mass ecological kind of process and system from a larger perspective as well. So that's in Greece, our honey producer. Also on our Greece study abroad, we visit an island farm and really look at the behavior over time perspective when we consider the role of tourism in an island environment. If you noticed in the news over the last couple of years, there's been a good bit of pushback on the tourism industry in terms of the impact on local communities. And what does that tourism behavior impact mean over time for local economy, which may be a positive, but then on the flip side, what does it mean for the local community? While it may be increasing some economic opportunities, a lot of times it's pricing out workers from actually living in that particular community. So behavior over time was a great connection point for that particular case study. Also in Greece, we visit a saffron farm. The causal connection circles, that just served as a great tool for understanding the role of a cooperative and the different people involved, different stakeholders involved in a cooperative agreement for an agricultural production side of things. And one of the stories that our saffron producer talks through with the students is how they started making these connections to form the cooperative, but then they had to expand that connections loop to bring in a different landowner because of some environmental impacts of rising temperatures in their community that had started to be more consistent from kind of weather impacts. And essentially, they did a little bit of research over a couple of years, and moving some of their fields just 3 miles to the north made a significant difference in their production. And so you think just a small amount of distance, but a large amount of difference in their production cycle. And so they looped in that new kind of landowner to be able to start shifting just a few miles north, but keeping that network strong and the cooperative strong in their particular location. Now, the other study abroad that I lead is connected to Morocco. So these next couple of examples fall within the country of Morocco. Camel treks, you can see the example down there on the right for that kind of one pager. With that, we look at some of the causal links, also kind of tied to tourism, of impacts of more and more people wanting that classic camel ride into the desert experience, which is absolutely beautiful. But understanding what some of those kind of causal links are. What is that decision? What are the economic impacts? And letting students kind of run with some of those different causal links to better understand not only their own impact as they are engaging in that particular experience, but also what are some other kind of key players in that particular system of operation. We also visit some rose production spaces in the Atlas Mountain areas, which is absolutely beautiful in the springtime. That's typically one of the first locations that we have for our study abroad program. So the iceberg tends to fit really well in that particular context, not only as a model itself and a tool itself that fits really well with that particular case study, but also just as a good starting point for students if they aren't familiar with systems mapping tools. It gives a really great tie-in for cultural elements that impact the system, as well as some of those like hidden structures that they don't even notice when they first arrive. But when we start talking with people in the community, like, oh, this has been operated this way for how many years? And this is a tradition connected with the women in the community. And oh, here's how you go and weigh the rose petals. Like it's all this like ingrained system that they get a hands-on kind of learning walk through that process with some of our local guides. And then to be able to come back and kind of map out those different layers of the system is a really cool experience for them to like make those connection points. Virtual exchange has also been something I've dabbled a little bit in. This past fall, I did a virtual exchange with a university in Morocco. One of the things we developed a case study connected around aquifers because the aquifer system is relatively similar between Florida and Morocco in terms of how some of those withdrawals and inputs kind of flow through. And so Stockflow was just such a like screaming at us of this is our tool we want to showcase with this particular group of students. And so it connected well with that water system and for students to be able to recognize how their own behaviors around water are impacting some of those withdrawals from the water system. When we look at water sustainability, what are things that we can do to counter that in terms of using less water, and also recognizing how so many pieces of that flow are out of our control because they're weather contingent. So what do we do about the things we can control in terms of water usage was a really good challenge for the students to think through and to have both perspectives from the Moroccan students and the Florida students was such a valuable back and forth kind of conversation around utilizing that systems tool as a common place for them to kind of share a particular context. So with these case studies, a couple of factors, some of them I've already mentioned in terms of the fails and some of the different pieces of the stakeholders, making sure they're aware that you're using them as a case so that they are prepared for some of those incoming questions. Another piece is just noting around engagement. Y'all students, they kind of want to go shopping when they're traveling. Um, they would prefer to be shopping than sitting in a hotel classroom environment, working on these lovely systems maps. So surprise, they're not necessarily as excited as you are about systems mapping, So it's a, I would say, consistent battle of reminding them that they are on an academic program and not a vacation in a particular location. So helping with that is that prep work for their general awareness of those particular sites, because I typically preface it with, if you're doing the prep work, you're going to save time in that particular moment of context. So you'll have more time to go do free time thing if you come in prepared and ready to do the work. And whether they know it or not, the more eye rolls that they give me, the more time we stretch that activity along, which maybe makes me a horrible or maybe a fabulous professor in that context. I'll let you be just a silent judge of that particular process. And in terms of the limited perspectives, just making sure students really understand that there's a lot of cultural nuances when you're analyzing these particular systems. We're mapping to try to understand a challenge, not to find a solution or try to suggest a solution in that particular context. We just want to understand what we can within such a limited time frame that we have in those particular spaces. Along that, sometimes you get delightfully surprised with your local guides when they speak systems language without even knowing that they're speaking systems language. So, a quick story, you don't always need giant sticky notes. Sometimes just the sand works great for mapping out a system. So we were in the oases in Morocco and we're on a quick tour through those oases with a local guide. And he bent over and started drawing out this map of how the oases flow into each other and telling the students how the usage of water in one oasis impacts the flow into the next, and then the next, and then was making connections to another water system that we had used as a case study a couple of days prior to this particular experience. And I'm standing back looking at this man drawing, thinking, I could not have planned this any better, could not have paid him more to do this. That was his natural way of illustrating to the students that flow of water and the context in which they were operating in. And so the students also appreciated that because naturally, as you can see in the giant sticky note, when they went to go start to map out the system later, they're like, oh, well, he already gave us this kind of inside scoop for a system. So I watched them pull up a photo and like enlarging their photo to like draw it out so they could see it a little bit better. And so some of those moments are just delightful surprises along the journey and just continue to prove that this kind of on the go concept of your classroom is literally anywhere in the world and you don't need fancy resources to get your point across to the students. It just made me smile so much in that particular context. All right, moving on. In terms of mapping tools and the reflection pieces, we all know and love the Water Center tools. The good thing is there's quite a few of them that are very portable and very accessible from lots of places around the world. I've found taking some of these smaller cards along the way is just super helpful to keep those questions centered. And likewise, building out some reflection questions for students. They have daily questions in terms of what are they observing, what are some of those systems connections that they're kind of seeing different perspectives from. We have group reflection time about once every 2 to 3 evenings. Try not to do it every evening, otherwise, they really start to roll their eyes at me with that time commitment. But every 2 to 3 nights seems like a good sweet spot to really pull everyone together and hear what others are thinking while they have their daily questions and kind of a personal journal to be kind of making those observations for. If you've got other resources that are super portable, I would love to hear of them. Again, we build this toolbox as a community for these systems mapping resources. So keeping us kind of moving along in terms of this EduVenture together, we have one more question for kind of a collective response and kind of playing off of the are we there yet? What is your ideal trip length? When you're personally traveling, whether that's with students or just kind of your own vacation time, what's your ideal trip length? go ahead and jot that into the chat if you would share in that context. And just while you're considering that kind of question, I'll share just a bit in terms of, excuse me, about 2/3 of the way into an adventure is typically when folks start to kind of shift back. When they know that home is going to be coming pretty soon, or that back to normal kind of space, in the case of when you're traveling with students abroad. Sorry, I literally think I swallowed a bug. Okay, swallowed now. So about 2/3 of the way through that trip is when I start getting the question of, can I go to McDonald's for some food? How much time do we have left in terms of visits to different places? When can I go shopping to get some more souvenirs to take home with me? So lots of those questions that really build on that kind of "are you there yet" kind of frame of mind. Um, it's always fascinating to see that kind of come to play because I've taken students for a little over 3 weeks. I've taken folks for just as short as like 9 days, and it never fails. About 2/3 of the way through, regardless of length, they start asking those questions. For me personally, I have learned that I don't really know what my limit is for travel because I love it so much. I think my longest stretch has been 6 weeks, and I wasn't ready to come home at that point in time. So I will see if there's ever a point when I'm like, okay, ready to come back home from that abroad kind of space. Most of the time, I'm like, I'm just loving being in a different context and engaging with people and uh, getting to show students a new experience is quite truly one of my absolute favorite things to do as part of my job. So, lots of different lengths, lots of agreement around the 2 weeks. Completely understand that, especially with students in tow. And I would say number of students in tow also impacts that kind of limit. And do you have a cohort in crime, aka a co-leader that you can bounce off of? I did 20 students solo in May, and I was like, 20 is too many to run solo. Need a cohort in crime to help manage those and to get names down as part of that process. I think it took me about 10 out of the 14 days to get all of their names down. In part because I think a few of them were intentionally avoiding me, so they weren't recognized and known by name. But that's a whole other story and analysis. Okay, thinking that kind of "are we there yet" context is a little bit of there's always going to be some challenges and some limitations with using any kind of tool, but systems mapping is not an exception in that particular process. So just kind of recognizing that there are some things to consider. One of them, working with a particular space. There's always going to be limitations with any space you're trying to work in, trying to map in, adapting into that particular context. I will say, I think one of my absolute favorite places was at a hotel in Greece. They had some outdoor tables lining the walkway to the hotel. And it just perfectly allocated 3 spaces so students could work together on their systems map. And then we had a little bit of a aisleway for a presentation to be able to give by the students or each group to share what their map looked like. And there wasn't a lot of traffic around that particular area, so it was quiet enough for students to have conversations. So that adapted really well. On the flip side, we tried using a like lobby area at one point in time. That did not go super well in terms of the amount of people coming in and out as distractions. It was hard to hear people from one side of the room to the other. So we're always adapting when we're trying to use these on the go kind of spaces for systems mapping. Likewise, course context is a super important one to really have in advance in terms of knowing what your purpose is for including systems mapping in that particular moment and really asking some of the hard questions of how much time is there truly to focus in on this particular process and what tool really fits well within that kind of confined time space. Stakeholder availability, what is actually feasible in the time that you have? A lot of times it may just be one stakeholder plus your kind of prep work of more general context for that particular space. Sometimes you might be able to bring in two or three kind of stakeholder perspectives in perhaps like a panel presentation kind of format in a particular location. So just figuring out what's feasible within that particular time and location. And then, as we've already mentioned, that engagement variation, it's super shocking. I know not everyone's as excited about systems as all of us. But if they're taking a class connected with it, hopefully they at least indulge you in your excitement and maybe will catch on to some of that excitement. You may convert them into a systems enthusiast along the way. So we recognize that there are indeed some challenges and limitations. But with that, just to reinforce that having that framework in place and bringing that flexibility really does offer that opportunity for memorable on-the-go learning. Sometimes the things that surprise you the most come as the side adventures, maybe the unexpected moments. This is a particular example from a group that I took to Morocco. We had a scheduled visit for the desalination plant. Fantastic visit. Went really well. And we're pulling out of the desalination plant. And our guide was like, okay, we're going to go to the research center now. We're like, okay, that was not on the plan for the day. But we arrived at the research center, which the students were kind of along the way or along for the ride as we show up and start walking around this tomato research facility. But then it all clicked as the owner of this particular research center starts talking. And he said this entire research center was put here because this area is now starting to receive water from the desalination plant. That is a different composition than rainwater or other irrigation water. And so he said the first time they started kind of doing tests with the desalinated water, it was impacting the growth of these crops. And so the research center shifted into this role of really providing an operation to see what works best with this desalinated water, because that was going to be the irrigation for years to come in that particular area. And so they started making those connections of, okay, changing water through a desalination plant to provide that irrigation also impacts how crops are grown in that particular area. So starting to see those connections and the links really helped then as we were in reflection mode and in that mapping process of this kind of case study of seeing what were some of those unintended consequences of bringing in a new kind of form of water supply, as well as what other opportunities and stakeholders needed to be around the table to ensure the economic viability of a crop being produced in that area, which is a major player in that kind of economic foundation for that community. And so it was a very practical, on the go kind of learning opportunity for the students. And then we were finishing out that day with kind of a more touristy stop along the coast where there's this like funicular that takes you up in an old kasbah that overlooks the city in Agadir. And the students all just like gathered in this little like overlook area and sitting. And so I just kind of popped over. I'm like, what are y'all doing? They're like, we're just talking about the day. I'm like, fantastic. Well, I'm going to put my teacher hat on for a moment. And here's a reflection question to think about while you're all sitting here chatting together. Because they're like, well, we have 15 minutes to kill. It's a beautiful view. I'm like, okay, great. Well, we're going to use this to our advantage in this particular moment and just kind of flex our reflection time that we had planned for later to just utilizing in that particular moment in time. And every time I run into one of these students over the last couple of years, they're like, hey, we really liked reflection when we were at that overlook. I don't remember what it was called, but that was a really cool kind of space just to reflect. And it was towards the end of our trip. And so it's just one of those that it sticks in these kind of memorable moments. Whether we hear it or not, really do last with the students and it keeps that impression. So, as we have kind of been on our venture today, we've really kind of looked at and thought about what should we pack. We've talked about that core framework and some of the more pragmatic kind of tools to really actually put in your bag. We looked at kind of where's the gelato, where's those sweet spots of places that we get to incorporate systems mapping through case studies, reflection, and those mapping tools. And then recognizing that those questions of are we there yet are going to come. There's some limitations, but with some intentional design and being prepared for those kind of on the go, flexible moments, because you all have this kind of toolbox that you get to apply in any space. We're prepared and ready to roll. So a couple of questions in terms of what's next for you to kind of just reflect and apply in your own kind of context. Couple of questions is just what could on-the-go systems mapping look like for you? Very simply. And then what's one thing that you can do this month to apply systems mapping into your particular context on the go? And so I thank you so much for your time today. I do have one final question as kind of an exciting little bit of a segue of would you go on an adventure with us in this kind of context of systems mapping on the go in a really cool location? And excited to get to share that in 2027, Morocco is a systems adventure in collaboration with the Water Center. And so we're going to have an info session next week, August 11th at 11 a.m. to kind of give some of those additional details if this would be of interest to you, and happy to answer any questions along the way. So with that, I will say thank you so much for being with me today. And again, thank you, Sherry and Water Center, for the opportunity to share.
Right. Thank you, Natalie. You did have any questions. We'll just check the chat. That was so informative, so exciting, wonderful comments in the chat. Um, anybody want anything you have for Natalie or anybody want to share? But I really am thinking about that question, like, how do I bring systems mapping on the go? It's kind of a part of my everyday work, but I think there are ways without being trips quite this spectacular that you just embed it. And I love that idea. Better understanding our context. How many times a day would our conversations and our work not be enhanced if we didn't take a moment to better understand our context? So regardless of what you do, that's just so applicable to all of us. So anybody did something jump out?
This got me thinking about the study abroad that I have for next late spring to Brazil, because we are actually able to partner with the university there, and they'll have students. We're able to do a mini course because they have much less bureaucracy than we do here to create a course. And so this is really helpful in terms of me thinking about case study and how to incorporate the contextual case study, but then even for the students in Brazil, kind of maybe doing some compare and contrast to, because we'd focus on food security because they've had a big food bank project they've been working on. But thinking about then the US context, and so that we can bring a little bit of those insights too. But it just really helped to inspire some of my thinking around what we can do differently, since we actually do have a solid kind of in-country higher ed partner this time, which was different from my previous study abroads to Costa Rica and Greece. So thank you for that.
Yeah, love that. Keep me posted on how that evolves.
Of course.
Natalie, I'll let you respond. So in the chat, Panarize, how might, whoops, lost it. Thank you. How might one do systems mapping on the go in a 1 to 2 hour convening with high profile stakeholders to really help them care about an issue?
Oh, great question. Um, 1 to 2 hours, I'd say it's a short amount of time, but enough time to utilize the tool. I would say we can never make someone care about an issue, but we can show them information that we hope can uh, inform their viewpoint and help to change that perspective into a more caring attitude towards that particular issue. Um, I would say limit it to one tool in that kind of time frame so that you can go a little bit more in depth. If there's a chance to give them any info or context ahead of time, if you're talking high profile stakeholder, the shorter description, the better in terms of a quick read, a one-page kind of overview with maybe one or two links, just to say, hey, this is coming. So you can kind of help prep them for some of that conversation. And I think anytime you can have a space with personal insight from particular stakeholders of that issue, I think that can help make a larger impact in terms of that personal connection point to a stakeholder, makes a stronger impact than just noting a perspective on paper, or giving them an article. So I would say classic of it depends on what that full context is, but that's, I would say, a general kind of response for that overview kind of context.
Well, and is it fair to say, Dahlia, that it's sometimes just recognizing there's a broader context is really helpful? And you're right, you can't force anybody to do anything, but I think that is part of the role that the systems thinking plays is, and you had talked earlier about like not jumping to the solution, but taking a minute to steep in the issue itself is a big piece. And then last question, anything you share with them specifically before or beyond the case studies? Like if you were going to give to students one thing to preview before this experience, what's your go-to for that?
Yeah, so a lot of times if I know what that particular tool is that I'm going to utilize as part of the systems mapping, I'll give them kind of the worksheet overview, even if it's just the framework of it, of like the iceberg. I'll send them the image of here's the iceberg. They may not understand what that means in the moment, but they at least have a visual and a little bit of context with that. And then as yes, I had already mentioned the just the article kind of links to it. And if there's, in particular, with our visits to specific organizations, I also share the link to that organization's website so they can take a deeper dive into the organization itself, to understand what their mission and vision are within that organization, kind of how they operate, what products do they have, and just giving them some more familiarity with the location itself, to help them kind of build out some understanding. Otherwise, I walk them through that, either on site or with our study abroad. We also do a couple of pre-departure meetings. And so in that pre-departure, we'll give them a kind of walkthrough of here's the tool. We'll go through more details with it. If we have time, I will teach them that tool in advance. A lot of times we don't have time to teach that particular tool in advance. It's more on the go while we're in that location of giving them the piece by piece walkthrough to start with. And I think I mentioned it earlier, just because we have 3 case studies along the way with our study abroad program, usually by the second or third, they kind of get into that rhythm of, okay, we know we're going to start with discussing kind of the context, and then we can move into thinking about the tool itself, and then kind of moving forward. I chuckled a little bit because they start to make those assumptions of, oh, this is how this tool is going to work. And so we were in Greece, and a couple of the students were like, okay, well, we'll get a jump on this so we don't have to spend as much time in our like class time. So they started working on it ahead of time. And then I walk in, I'm like, okay, so this is a different approach for a tool. And here's how we're going to flip it to look at it from this other perspective. And you see them all go like, oh man, like we have to do this from a different side of thing. So it's good for them to learn also in terms of not making those assumptions of how a tool is going to work and different angles that you can look at an issue from.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Natalie, and thanks to all of you. We do love it when you join us. And so I'm going to just, if you are available and want to come see us next time, let me do a quick share here. Oh, of course, the slides. So next, Pete Reynolds from Learn Deep is going to share something that he's been working on for several years. Pete, we got to know him when we did some work in Milwaukee Public Schools. He's from that area. His nonprofit Learn Deep works to really help schools think differently about change. And so whether you're in a school context or not, he's taking some lean canvas ideas, really looking at how those can be enhanced and grown specifically in pre-K 12. But I think others would be interested in that. And he also has developed and really given a lot of thought to a little quadrant framework about where are you in the change process and how can you pretty quickly assess where you are, and so what the next steps would be to move going forward. So regardless of your context, please join us. And I just have to say, the first Thursdays are always fun. We had a couple months that we didn't have them. It's just so nice to be together. And as I looked and recognized who's here and all the places that you come from and the opportunities that we've had to meet and connect, Open Studio is really, I don't have a lot of spaces in my calendar that bring together such a diverse group of people who really just care about thinking and making the world a better place. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. And we hope this one will resonate with you as well. Allison put this in the chat. Natalie and many others, Jara, are products of this. Several of you on this call. We are very close to the deadline for our cohort 12. Cohort 13 will begin in April. The newly updated coaching pieces have been done by Alice Smith, who's been active in the chat for you this time. And so we would be happy if you're thinking about it. This one is on Wednesdays. I know we have a lot of professors on this call, so we very intentionally rotate the Wednesday and the Tuesday, Thursday. Monday, Fridays aren't really popular for a year-long engagement. So cohort 13 will be on Thursdays. But if that Wednesday is better, reach out to us for some information about that. We do continue to offer a couple paid short courses if you're not ready to commit to 14 months, but just want to go a little further in your systems thinking journey. These are all available on our website. We have these up. Coming in September is Mastering Accumulations. This is just a personal favorite of mine because it really is telling that story. We're going to change the title to something, but it's like it all adds up. Like things, accumulations add, they decrease, and paying attention to the rates and flows on that can really help you see those situations differently. So if you're at all interested, we would love to have you in any of those events that we have coming up. Thanks for spending some time with us today and have a great rest of your day or evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. It was awesome.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you so much.